Right, well, good afternoon, everyone, and this is the very last session of this absolutely wonderful meeting. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Chris Budd. I'm at the University of Bath, and slightly unusually for this meeting, I'm a mathematical modeller, not a statistician, and I spend my life trying to kind of devise models for things like climate and COVID and other things like cooking potatoes, and then I'm interested in explaining the complexities of these models. My primary audience is normally industry, but I'm also interested in working with policymakers. I do a lot of work with schools, and I also come into contact with the media, trying to talk about mathematical modelling. And most of my media experiences have been very good, and no one's commented on my outfit so far. But I will say, my worst media experience, I was on Radio Bristol talking about something or other, and halfway through the interviewer stopped and he said, "Professor Budd, I'd last want to ask you one really important question," and he asked me to multiply 2 3-digit numbers together in my head. So that was the situation I'm in. You might like to think how you would, as a hook for this, how would you solve that situation? And I'll tell you at the end of this session how I particularly address that one. Anyway, I'm sure we all agree this has been an absolutely fabulous meeting, and it's shown that there is a huge appetite not only to communicate mathematics and statistics, but also to do it in a way that we really engage with policymakers and the broader public, and we can define that as we wish. And I was really struck by Emily Shuckburgh's presentation earlier, where I would describe it as the four W's, which is why do we want to communicate, how do we communicate, what do we want to achieve, but perhaps most importantly, who do we want to communicate our message to? So those are the 4 W's that I've taken away from Emily's talk. And what I want us to try to do today in this session is think, how can we take all these kind of great ideas and this great energy that's come out of this meeting and take it further? What should the next really positive steps be that we can do, both as a community and also using the resources that we have here with the INI, and various other things. And in your feedback thing, we've come up with 5 possible ways that this might happen. One is collaboration with government. I'm not quite sure how you do that, but suggestion I'll put out there, maybe we should have a session in the House of Lords to talk about mathematics and statistics. Second one is skills development for early career researchers. So, quick advertisement, Ben's already said this at Bath, we've been running for the last 20 years a course for undergraduates on how to communicate mathematics. Do you think that's a good idea? Do you think that might be something else people should use? I don't know. Third possibility, a policy primer for mathematicians. Is there something we could produce, a simple resource that you could look at and say, this is what I should do if I want to engage, say, with policymakers? We had a workshop about 6 months ago which fed into this, where we did try to put something along those lines together, but it was very much work in progress, and I think there's lots to be done. So can we do that? We've just had a fantastic talk, thank you so much, about mathematical ambassadors, and how can we grow this, how can we make it that sort of better? And finally, should we have academic programs in mathematical communications? Or a real passion for me is, how can we make communicating mathematics respectable in the world of the ref, where they're only interested in 4-star publications? Okay, so that's a bit of a passion for me. So these are various points that I think we can address. What I'm going to do now is ask my splendid team of panellists, starting over here, to say a few words. Control yourselves. About some of these topics. And then I will throw it open to discussion. So a few people have come up to me and I can sort of do that. And anyone is welcome. There is, everyone is welcome to say anything. We will treat anything said. We are being recorded, aren't we? Good. Right. So everything said will be recorded. But we're really keen to hear what you want to say. And then when we get through that discussion, I'll probably ask each panelist again just to say a closing word or two. And then we can all go on our way and go home to our wherever we are. So, wasting no time, we'll hand over first to Mary Gregory from the wonderful ONS, and maybe you say.
Hello, hi, thank you. I'm from the Data Science Campus in the Office of National Statistics. I think firstly I'd just like to say thank you. The event's been brilliant and all the speakers have been brilliant, and I feel very lucky my job is to be in this space and do these things, so that's brilliant. I thought because everyone likes 3 points, I would try and keep 3 points. I feel like there are loads of things that could be done to take this forward, and I'm sure others will have really good suggestions. I thought I'd start with one that's probably for everybody, and we don't need a big process to make it happen. And that's kind of remembering that preparation is key to really good communication. So I think David mentioned in his how he prepared really hard when it was really important. But I think sometimes it's easy to forget that to make the message simple, you have to prepare harder than to actually give the more complex version. So I think that's something we can all do, hopefully a lot. I think the next one is around collaboration. And I think there's two aspects to this. One is there are loads of different kinds of expertise. So whether you're the modeler, whether you're the data journalist, whether you're the person who's going to receive the information, you all have something different to bring to it. And one thing that's really struck me today is that there is expertise out there that we can all draw on, and perhaps we don't all know where it is. So I wonder if there's something in pulling that together in some way so that people can learn from it. Because I think things like the Winton Centre, things like Hannah's work on accessibility, there's a lot that actually already exists and we don't need to recreate. And then the third one is something I think hopefully my team can help with, and I saw the masterclass mentioned as one of the follow-ups, and absolutely that's something we're looking to develop further and to share much more widely. So I don't know whether people know about this. In very brief, it's a set of videos, quizzes, case studies that senior leaders in government are doing as training. It's around 6 hours of training with some brilliant videos from David, from Hannah Fry, and lots of others. We're looking to make that more open. So if all goes to plan, this isn't official, but never mind. We're going to try and make it totally open so that anybody can access the videos, subject to those who did them agreeing. We're also going to make it open to anybody in the civil service as a full course. Not just the senior civil service, which I think will be really good. And if all goes to plan, we're also going to make variations on it so that it's more focused on kind of different professions within government and that kind of thing. So we may welcome some of you asking for further input on that. But I think by the same token, we can hopefully feed in on how do we help the outside world understand government a bit better. Because I think often as analysts in government, we're translators between the more expert academia world and the kind of less expert policy world, and hopefully we can therefore help around that. That's it from me.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So our next panellist is Julia Gogg, who was one of the critical mathematicians working on SAGE and did an incredible amount of work during COVID. So it's a real honour to hand over to Julia.
Thanks, Chris. And one of the highlights of the silver linings of COVID work was finally being able to work with Chris on some papers. That was fun. I tend to get very focused on the specific tasks in hand. So I've been looking at this list of proposals, and they're all good, but I'm going to sort of make a bid for two in particular. And the background to thinking is what we've heard over the last 2 days here, particularly what the questions and the side discussions are, and also thinking the intersection of where the Isaac Newton Institute sits within our community. All of these are great things. Maybe some of these aren't quite where we can follow on in Newton hat. The two I'm going to make a bid for are numbers 2 and 3. So the skills development for ECR and researchers and the policy primers. But different audience. I was very struck yesterday. Is David Abrams here? He's not here. The former Newton director saying, why is it we give such terrible lectures and seminars? And my mind's been whirring since we do. This is the best set of talks I've been to for a long time. It's really striking. People who are interested in communicating mathematics can give really good talks. So the target for 2 could be super broad. We could be talking about trying to reach all PhD students in mathematics in the UK and beyond. Early career researchers, senior researchers, anyone who communicates maths, whether it's to a public audience of any variety, a policy audience or other mathematicians. Thinking very broad there, I think Newton has some reach to do something with that. I have to think about format and what could work. It was also very striking, the tips that were coming out of all the talks. There was so much overlap. So there clearly is a set of things that can be taught. And if I was trying to prime PhD students now, which I will be as soon as these talks are online, I know there's a big set of talks I'm going to be pointing them to go and watch. So we have the basis to teach this. The policy primer for mathematicians, I'm going to take my story, is when I was a Royal Society URF, we were packed off in various courses as part of being a URF. One's about communicating science, which I went on, and Judith Ham was one of the course leaders. It was very inspiring. One of the pieces of homework was to say yes to the next thing you were asked to do. The next thing I had was an email from Millennium Maths Project, from Jenny Gage to do something with the Motivate Project. That was 19 years ago. I'm now the interim director of Millennium Maths Project. And that's been a really happy partnership. I went on that course. The second course that was on there was a media training. I thought, I don't need that. I'm never going to need that. So I didn't go on that. And I'm going to be honest, if there was a policy course, I would be, I'll worry about that at some point when, it's too late when you need it to then try and cram it in. So we need to think carefully about who we'd be trying to reach with a policy primer for academic mathematicians, whether it can be something which is almost emergency first aid help. I'm in this situation. My field has suddenly unexpectedly become something which is needed for policy. Okay, a pandemic modeller should have thought this through, I know. But there are going to be other areas which pop up unexpectedly. Can we have something which is on tap for when someone needs it unexpectedly? So different audiences, different timescales.
Should that policy course be sort of writing or some other medium?
I think a primer even on how government and science works. We've been thinking about this in Juniper Hat because we've all had this extreme experience, but our memory will fade fast, both individually, sort of just what a shock it was from a standing start to suddenly you're on stage, what are you going to do? But also postdocs who are part of this, their story is different to mine. Trying to capture that soon, so we remember the whole experience.
Okay, thank you. Tom, so this is Tom Whipple, who is science editor for The Times, and has written some wonderful articles about mathematics. So, Tom.
Thank you. Yeah, I would like to echo. This is genuinely, I think, the only entertaining conference I haven't been to. It's quite something. There's been so many well thought through talks, and I love that. One of my hobby horses in science is scientific papers, which are needlessly boring quite a lot of the time, and needlessly badly written quite a lot of the time. And one of the things I find striking is, if you read them from 50 years ago, that was not the case. There were people then who thought, I'm going to try, and now it's, can I make up 16 acronyms in the first 2 paragraphs that you then have to check 5,000 words later when they next pop up? With regards to these goals, one of the things that I think is really interesting is the early career researchers. I've loved this conference. I don't think there's any particular reason to change it. I would like to see a repeat of basically the same sort of thing. But it would be interesting to get people coming on and trying to explain their research. I think I'm certainly conscious that this conference has been played on easy mode, in that we've been talking about a minuscule slice of maths, and it's the easiest slice of maths to talk about. And the maths that goes on at the Isaac Newton Institute is generally on hard mode. And I would love to see how we could make that sort of maths accessible as well. And as a writer, I find it extremely hard, and only on a few half dozen occasions have I actually written about sort of pure maths and things like that. I'm now going to very briefly, this is about looking forward, but it's slightly, and I bothered people about this last night, but I'm going to briefly hijack this from my hobby horse. What I've really enjoyed about this is chatting to people in the civil service, because with the exception of the ONS, who have been very good in the pandemic, it's not something I've been able to do. We spoke about modelers and SAGE and things like that. The great thing about SAGE is that they were all academics, which meant that they weren't under the clutches of the civil service. And you could email them all, and after initial reticence, people like Marr would just get back to me and give me replies very, very rapidly, and were brilliant. I remember, in fact, once one article I wrote, I sort of referred to, jokingly, the shadowy organisation known as SAGE. And Patrick Valance called me up and he said, "You bloody speak to them every day, I can't control them." But I'm going to very briefly give 3 examples of communication in the pandemic, because I would love the civil servants in this. When you rise, I want you to be sleep ratings. When you rise to positions of power, remember these examples, because I want to try to get across the absurdity for everyone of what goes on. So example number 1, there was a bit of research on cross-reactive T cells, so the idea that T cells from other coronaviruses might have offered some protection against coronavirus, and it had been done by Public Health England. And I found the paper, and I looked up the research, I looked up researcher. I saw Public Health England had a press release 2 weeks ago offering interviews, which is unheard of. And so I went to them and was like, "I want to do this thing you press released." And they said, "Oh no, we press released it 2 weeks ago." I said, "Yeah, but nobody wrote about it." He said, "No, we were doing the press 2 weeks ago." "But nobody wrote about it." "But you were doing it." But they wouldn't. They were doing the press 2 weeks ago. The 2 weeks ago had finished, with no press done, so now the press would not be done. Moving up a level of absurdity, and I told Tamandra this last night, the only time I think that the UK Health Security Agency came to me with a story during the pandemic, they said, I don't know why, but they said, and it was great, they said, "Do you want to do a profile of Megan Call, who was the chief epidemiologist for UXA?" And I absolutely did, because I did some amazing stuff. And so trying to work out how the variants spread and things like that, really on the hoof maths. It's hard to convince the features editor of the paper that we want to do 2 pages on a mathematician. I succeeded. I went back to the features editor, "Fine, do you think that you can make this interesting? Do it." I went back to UXA and said, "Yes, can I do it?" And they said, "Yes." And I said, "When can we do it?" And they said, "Let's do it on this day." I said, "Oh, no, this was for International Women's Day. We can only do it on International Women's Day." And so, and it was like, it wasn't even good news. I didn't care she was a woman. It was, I was unable to do that interview because it didn't fit with their grid, the civil service grid. The final thing, which is even more serious, I think, is when Andrew Bridgen started talking about vaccines, I think the most important thing that could have been done in that week by the MHRA is explain to people why they think vaccines are safe. I had gone to them earlier and said, "I want to sit down with a statistician. You've got the yellow card data set. This is ludicrously messy data. You've got people reporting flatulence as a side effect of the vaccines. But from this, you need to get a signal. And then you've got to link it to GP database and do all this." It's a fascinating piece of statistical work. And I said, "I just want to sit with a statistician. They can be, if you've got your weird stuff, they can be anonymous if you want. I don't care. I want to sit with a statistician and go through this." And I think that was the most important thing they could have done that week. And they could not and would not. In fact, for the entire pandemic, the MHRA, I've heard, have been brilliant, and I think they have been brilliant. The pandemic is probably the most important thing the organisation will ever do. It is about trust with the public. They did not speak to me once in the whole of the pandemic. So when you're in positions of power, say, and this isn't how other countries do it.
Thank you, Tom. So all civil servants in the audience, you heard it from here. Finally, with Christie Marr. So Christie used to be the Deputy Director at the INI, I hear, but is now the Executive Director of the new National Academy for Mathematical Sciences. So you're going to tell us a bit about that, I imagine.
Yes, thank you. So this is actually my very first time speaking out about the Academy of Mathematical Sciences. We're going to drop the word national from it for complicated reasons. It is representing all the nations, but devolution, etc., etc. We're watching this space anyway. So the Academy of Mathematical Sciences. So you probably all know that there is the Royal Academy for Engineering, the Royal Society for Chemistry, there is not such a body for the mathematical sciences. There is the Council for Mathematical Sciences, which has wonderful representation. So, there's the London Mathematical Society, the IMA, the RSS, Edinburgh Mathematical Society, so on, ORS. But as they would quite rightly tell you, they have one problem with their constitution, is that they can't make decisions, do full actions, unless they have complete agreement across all of their societies, which makes it more difficult for them to do things. So they have been taking the lead on saying we actually need a national academy that can be a voice that can advocate. And we can all disagree under the radar, we can have our own arguments, etc., but then we can present a voice, we can have an authoritative voice for the mathematical sciences community. A lot of this stemmed from the 2018 Bond Review, The Era of Mathematics, which one of its key findings was that we needed to have an academy for the mathematical sciences should be established in order to facilitate links between academia, government and industry. And in fact, we've expanded the scope for that since. We've said, actually, we're not just going to have academia, we're not going to just have practice, we're also going to encompass education as well. And then, of course, communication comes throughout all of that. So that's really what the scope of the National Academy is going to be. So, turning to some of these questions. So, as I say, I'm in post now for 2 months. We've got an organisation that we're working with who are really scoping out, thinking about the policy. There are two things about policy, and I think one has to partition them and think about them separately. There's policy for mathematics, and then there's mathematics for policy, and they're very different. So you need to think about, this is again, know your audience. So are you concerned about policy for mathematics? Are you concerned about trying to increase the number of PhD students in mathematical sciences? So policy for mathematics. Or are you concerned with mathematics for policy, what Julia's doing, trying to influence people, make decisions at governmental level? So think about those two things. And then another thing, when it comes to communication for the Academy, so am I bringing together communities that don't normally talk together as much as they might do? By the way, I'm not thinking they're disjoint communities, by the way. Academia, practice, communication, educators, they're not. But, and a huge many, I mean, Chris live in every single set of these, essentially. But they're not always united, and they don't always understand the needs and the challenges of one another. And there can be, and across the mathematical sciences as well, there can be slight distrust across different communities. I don't know quite what you're doing. We only have a very small funding pot. If you get more money, then am I losing out on money? And so really what the Academy is going to be trying to do is bring people together so that actually it's for the greater good of the mathematical sciences and also for the greater good of society. So we've got two things. One, we've already established, we've got contact, we've got a policy organisation working for us, and we're really scoping out the vision. And I think that having a policy primer will be a really good idea, and that's something we should be looking at. And we're in the process of putting together role profiles for recruiting a policy unit. So then there will be more than one employee with the National Academy. We might have 3. So if any of you are interested in doing that or sharing information about this unit, that would be fantastic. And then I should say that we have multiple work streams. So there's an executive board of 14, and then there's also an advisory board, which is about an additional 50. And we have multiple work streams. One of them is early career mathematicians, another one is policy, another one is communication, of course there's governance, etc., etc. So all of these things are on our radar, but everything that has been talked about over the past few days is something that we really care about. So it's been fantastic for me here, so thank you.
Well, thank you, Christie, and so that you guys hang on to your meeting in a minute. I mean, it's very exciting to see how things are going. In terms of timescales, when do you think you might be advertising for this policy position?
So the role profiles are currently being drawn up. So the policy unit, so the policy group that we're already working with, they're already working. They've been doing that for a few weeks. The policy unit, when we're recruiting, realistically, how long does it take in academia to get role profiles approved when they're brand new role profiles? So let's say it's going to be out in 6 weeks.
6 weeks, okay. Well, that's something for us all to think about, and I think that could be a very, very positive impact.
The website, I hope, will be launched on Monday.
There you go. And you can give us the URL at some point.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, we've got about 15 or so minutes to think about the points that have been raised and for questions or comments to come from the floor, which we can ask our fantastic team over here to have a think about. And I do aim to finish at 4:30 because I'm sure we've all got to go home. So can we start? So a few people have brought up things with me over coffee and so on. Would any of those who'd like to speak? Yes, sir.
I didn't bring up anything. If you
Doesn't matter. Could you say who you are and then what your point is?
So I'm Joe Shingleton from the UK Health Security Agency. As a civil servant, I obviously can't comment on what Tom brought up, but I wondered if you could expand a little more about the kind of the scope of the problem. Is it something that was just the problem during the pandemic, and specifically with UKH? Say, for example, if you wanted to find out, you wanted to write a piece about avian flu and wanted to speak to DEFRA, do you think that would still be a problem now? Or is it something that was more typical to the pandemic and to the UK Health Security Agency or DHSC or whatever?
Yeah, we'll start with Tom. You want to as well, yeah?
It is the entirety of the Whitehall Civil Service Press. My analysis, and I don't know what's going on the inside, is they don't get rewarded for anything. They do get punished if things go wrong. Their attitude is just stop them. We couldn't go and see anyone being vaccinated on the first day of the vaccine. I've never managed to just get an official on background briefing. I just want to do this. The attitude is that we must be trying to screw them over. If I phone a uni press officer, they say, yes, let me help you out. Let's get you chatting to an academic. But it's everything. When I started in features journalism, I wanted to do a piece on the new British Army ration packs. I ate a different nationalities' ration packs a day. Every other army in the world just sent me their ration pack. The UK Army, it took 3 months, and there had to be 2 press officers watching me eat.
And what was it like? Was it nice?
It was awful. The best one was the French.
Oh, well. Right, Mary.
I feel like as a civil servant on the panel, it might be worth me giving some background because I totally sympathise, and I don't know, but it pains us civil servants as much as it pains the journalists, I think. I have the luxury of being in ONS at the moment, but I have been in ministerial departments. And if you look, you'll see ONS and Office for Statistics Regulation often recommend that the press should be able to talk directly to statisticians, but then of course you've got the media departments which say otherwise in a ministerial department. So it absolutely is across government because that's just every single department has the same rule. So we have a luxury in ONS, but I just want to say that us civil servants hate it as much as the journalists.
I believe it. We chat to them and then we sort of say, we'd love to actually chat to you on the record.
Julia, do you want to comment at all? Or Christie? Okay.
Could I make a point?
Of course, yeah.
This is from my experience of doing various things with civil servants, and also being on the advisory board and I'm a trustee of the Science Media Centre, and it's exactly the same issue. It's got nothing to do with the pandemic. In fact, arguably, it loosened up slightly during the pandemic, and it's a major issue. I mean, there are areas of science in which basically in this country and in many other countries it's similar, all the experts work for the government on our civil service of various sorts. And so trying to get some on-the-record comment in those areas is essentially impossible. And I don't believe this happens in other countries, certainly not in the same way.
Thank you, Kevin. So, anyone? Yes, once again, say who you are and what your question is. Yeah.
Hi, Emma Bolio from DSGL, so I'm kind of a civil servant, kind of a mad scientist. I read through the 5 examples here, and they're all brilliant, but I do feel like there's something missing for industrial mathematicians. It seems very focused on on sort of academics or academics doing policy or policy people trying to use what academics are doing. But there's actually a whole tranche of mathematicians working in industry, and it feels like that's missed out. And the other thing, just to praise this event, is I think there's a lot of good from bringing people from different areas together. And I think actually, I'm sat next to me from LNS, I'm probably sat near quite a few academics, probably, you know, like the chap who did the presentation who's an industrialist. You know, there's a lot to be gained in terms of communication from just being around different people. And some of these, I think, would miss that piece of the puzzle.
So, you're going to tell us about the KE Hub?
I will say that as well, but I will also say I didn't plant this question, but this question was absolute music to my ears for exactly why I'm doing what I'm doing at the National Academy, because that's exactly what we want to do, is to recognise the phenomenal maths that's going on that's not happening in academia, and also not just happening in mathematics departments. So I've had the joy of being at the Isaac Newton Institute for over a decade, which means my interpretation of the mathematical sciences is beyond broad. We had somebody actually here earlier on today was on a program we had on mathematics and forensic science. I really have a very, very broad interpretation of mathematics, and I want to bring in people who are using maths in other disciplines and people who are using maths in industry, government, charitable organisations, whatever. So that's very much part of who I want to engage with. And so somebody asked me, so lots of people, I was having this conversation with Tom earlier, that so many people yesterday began their talks with, I'm not a mathematician, but, and then they presented phenomenal mathematics that they were working with. And so for me, as Katie said, these are all mathematicians. In my definition of what a mathematician is, they're all mathematicians. You are a mathematician, and I long to engage with you as part of the Academy. Then the KE Hub. You might have heard that there was another recommendation of the Bond Review was for a Connected Centres network, and that has morphed on, and it is now the KE Hub. And Rachel, is Rachel here?
To wave, let's just say it was Rachel Harris.
So Rachel Harris is, who's also on the board of the National Academy. So Rachel is the manager of the KE Hub, and she's doing exactly that. So she's working with people who are using mathematics and right across the country. Do we want to get Rachel to say something?
Do you want to say something, Rachel? Oh, she's
does that cover it for you, Rachel? Yeah. Cool.
And I'll also add that there's other operations like the study groups and VChems and so on who, really want to try to bridge this gap between academia and industry. Does anyone else want to comment on this? Tom, are you going to? No. But I mean, engagement between industry and academia is absolutely my passion, and there are mechanisms there, but I'm very excited about the Knowledge Exchange Hub. We've been needing this for years, and that last we're getting it, so fantastic.
Yeah, I just think for the training and communication as well, there's mathematicians in industry who need help with communicating the complex maths they're doing to stakeholders, customers.
Just to plug, we have an MSc in Bath on maths and data science with industry, so if you have any suitable students, send them in our direction.
And our work stream is very carefully named Early Career Mathematicians. It's not early career researchers, it's early career mathematicians. And that's really carefully thought through, because we're wanting to have early career teachers and people who have gone out into industry.
Thank you. Any more from the floor? Nick.
Hi, Nick Coleman. I'm not a mathematician.
Oh, yes, you are.
I don't know if you do this, but I've been involved in the Royal Society's Summer Science Exhibition for 3 times over a number of years, which is forces academics to get together in groups and produce exhibitions for school children. Groups of school children and the Great and the Good come around for about a week. And all 3 of the big stereo cosmology movies I did were shown there. All got receptions there and all went on to be shown worldwide in all sorts of places. So if you don't already have it, opportunity to have a summer mathematics exhibition somewhere.
I couldn't support that more. 10 years ago I ran one of these myself, and I spoke continuously for 2 weeks. I had no boys left at the end, but 100,000 people came, including the royal family. It was spectacular. So, have any of you had a similar experience of science festivals, for example?
Oh, I enjoy the summer exhibitions. The Royal Society is their summer soiree, and the best thing about it is all the fellows. They invite the media and they invite the fellows. There's about a 60-year age gap between us. And there's one school bus that goes to Cambridge and one school bus that goes to Oxford at the end of it.
I should say, on the night they invited the fellows, David, you listen up as an FRS, we were given specific advice on how to deal with people who had drunk a lot of alcohol. Christie.
Nick, can I answer your question by saying I presented as having been former deputy director at INI, so putting myself firmly in the academia camp. I was also a secondary school teacher for many years. I've taught in a number of prisons, Wormwood Scrubs, etc., etc. I really care about education, again, in the very, very broad sense. And that's going to be a scope of the academy, is looking at education, but not just in schools, looking at numeracy in the population, and things. So, and I've been organising the Cambridge Science Festival for a number of years. We had Emily Shuckborough as one of the brilliant talkers at that. Amazing speakers at those events. So actually doing these sorts of things, speaking maths to children, I think is very, very important. And something actually I really care about is getting children talking about mathematics, A, in the classroom, and B, amongst the family. And I've done things such as through I ran summer maths puzzles competition to put it out every day in August. One year I put a different puzzle up to get families in the summer holidays talking about maths over the kitchen table. Because if I can get people talking about maths over the kitchen table, that's going to be one of my ticks that I've set myself.
Thank you. And if you want to work with school children, I could strongly recommend, as I say, go along to science festivals, or you can get involved with the Royal Institution Maths Master Classes, or you can talk to Julia for the MMP, or all the stuff the RSS is doing. Lots and lots of opportunities. So it's not just Katie Steckles giving the talk to all the festivals.
And we've done New Science Live together, you and I, one time, haven't
we? We have done New Scientists Live. That was another 100,000 people came to it. My goodness, that was a big day. Right. Yes, at the back.
As a data journalist, I'm aware of another community...
So can you say your name again?
Anna from ONS.
Yeah.
As a data journalist, I'm aware that I went to another conference from a similar number of people from the other side of the media, but there is a whole other group of individuals who are also trying to work out how to combat misinformation, represent numbers accurately, who are trying to dig out the things that are important to policy, they just are in the media. And that's like a whole emerging field. So I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on how we cross-pollinate that, because I feel like I'm between two worlds. I'm kind of like a civil servant, I'm kind of like a journalist, and I do both. I help the data people communicate in a newsy way, and the news people want to know how to communicate data. So I don't know how to be a bridge.
Julia.
There we go. I was pondering that as well, actually. One thing, going back to Emma's comment of just getting the range of people in the same room, talking to each other matters. Tom, I've gone back and looked at the emails I haven't replied to from you. Having met you, it changes relationship. And it bought me a drink, so I'll definitely... It matters though, doesn't it, that we sit in the same room that we meet. So I wonder if it's just a matter of getting some human beings together from these different groups. Yeah. Does that fit into part of some of this agenda? Is this a different thing? I'm not sure. But I think get the right people together.
Anyone else? Yes.
But don't call it a conference for journalists, or the civil servants might not be allowed there.
Oh. Language is very important. Right. Who else? Yes.
Rachel from the National Cybersecurity Centre. I guess people at this conference are obviously very passionate about the subject of communicating numbers. I guess how do we motivate other people to care about it? I think it's often seen as kind of unnecessary extra, a lot of work. I guess just interested in your thoughts on how we make that to care about it.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of how do you motivate your fellow mathematicians?
Well, and like just people in business, I guess. You know, people in industry and just people that should be communicating these things better?
I slightly feel, I don't know if this goes against spirit, I slightly feel people want to do it or they don't. And I think the trick's encouraging the people who want to do it. I mean, I studied maths just in those buildings over there, and to be honest, a large proportion of the mathematicians I think probably wouldn't have wanted to have stood up and decided to engage in Junos maths. They like maths, they didn't necessarily like communicating it. I think the trick is to find the people who do want to do it. Because I think if you force people to do it, they're just not going to be. They're not going to be good at it. They've got to want to do it. But I think one of the ways to do it is what I spoke to earlier. I think too many people don't talk about the maths because they think people aren't interested. When actually people are really interested and don't get enough of it. The response I get to articles that are often about topics where my news editors are like, really? But go on, let's give it a go. Are so high because people are, how many people do Sudoku? The sort of the appetite for this stuff is huge. So I think possibly that's one way to do it, is to let people know that the audience is there. But I think forcing people who don't want to do it probably isn't going to help anyone.
Okay. David. Can I just make a comment about that last one? One of the things we did with the maths in industry was we actually templated the articles to some degree because we wanted people to, we wanted the authors actually to state the problem, state the various ways that could be used to tackle the problem, use one of those ways to get an answer, and then actually to say if it worked or not, or didn't work. And sometimes the things that didn't work were quite as valuable as others. So we had an impact statement. We did all that in order that the industry people could see exactly what the value of the mathematics was, or that the mathematical method, should we say, was providing. And it will take quite a long time, I think, for that to sort of eke out to everybody. But I do believe that the best way of doing it is just providing evidence of value.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question then. Morris.
Thank you. So just going on from what you mentioned before about we live in a RAF world where our 4-star papers are what counts. And what David Abrams said yesterday about why do we give such bad talks, such bad seminars? Well, what incentivization mechanism is there for us to communicate mathematics well? What mechanism is there to ensure that people give good lectures, good talks, good seminars? And what do we do when we receive bad mathematics communication? We smile politely, nod, and clap at the end. So that behaviour is normalised in academia. There's no disincentive to bad communication. So in academia, and that permits to our students going out to industry, bad communication in mathematics is just something that we do. We've sat through lectures where we've been baffled for 95% of the lecture. So even if we find ways to teach people how to communicate mathematics effectively, what incentive is there for them to do it, and what cultural norms are there for them to encourage them to do that?
So, Christie, I'm going to give this one to you, because is this something the Academy could address?
In fact, this is something that a discussion we've had. Bear in mind the Academy is 2 months in, and we're just still at the brainstorming stage and just thinking about ideas. But I'm going to throw out an idea that it was actually someone from industry had, and I like getting challenges from different ideas because different people have different perspectives. So this was someone from industry said to someone to those in academia and said, I've seen a variation on this theme being effective in industry, can you do it? And it was essentially, so don't shoot me down here, in the same way that EPSRC funding had impact built into it a number of years ago. They said, can you build communication into EPSRC funding? Can you encourage people can you make that a metric that is valued? So that was exactly what you were saying, is they were saying, can we make it so there is some currency given to good mathematics communication? And the method they threw out was in the same way things were changed by EPSRC putting an emphasis on impact, can you do a similar thing with maths communication?
Thank you. Well, let's hope the National Academy can sally forth and do this. I really think we'd better stop now because we're beyond half past. So sorry to everyone who wasn't able to ask a question. I will, though, ask each panellist just to say 2 or 3 words just to sum us up. So, Mary.
Thank you. I think I'm going to just pick up on that last point actually and say, why should we do it? Well, because it's going to make a difference. If you write something people can comprehend, it's more likely to have an impact, whether it's communication or impact. It's more likely to have an influence and more likely to make the world a better place. So why wouldn't you?
Julia.
I'll do something about the last 2 questions all at once. How do we incentivise people to be more interested in maths? The interest is there. There are barriers to it. How do we give better talks? Do you know what? If any of us were told you can sit down and read this thing or listen to this thing for 1 hour, and all our talks for the rest of our lives would be better, we'd all want that, wouldn't we? There's lots of barriers to it, like fear it's difficult, or cultural norms, or we heard the one of trying to be too clever. Remove the barriers rather than we need to make people interested in maths. It's there. We want to give better talks. That interest is there.
Thank you, Julia. Tom?
I'm going to slightly rescind something I said in response to your question, which is obviously everybody needs to communicate. I think standing in front and trying to do sort of exciting maths talks to the Royal Institution isn't for everyone, but obviously everyone in maths needs to communicate clearly, and I hope that, and I take heart from scientific papers of the past, as I say. If you go back, I had cause to read the original Watson and Crick paper, and it's 2 pages, they're completely clear, and anyone could understand it. And I guarantee now that would be published in Nature, and it would be, I wouldn't even notice it was significant. So I think that clarity of thought and thinking about the reader is something that has, or the listener, is something that has slightly been lost, and I think we can get it back, and that would be good for everyone.
And I'm going to say that, David, you're a fantastic role model in many, many ways, but one thing that I really admire that you do is you put out there things where things have gone wrong, which allows the rest of the world, us mere mortals, to get things wrong too. And so what I would really like to see is to see maths communication built into schools, so children are very, very comfortable with talking about mathematics, and it becomes a natural thing. Then they go home, they talk to their families, and then that's being built in so that you're not suddenly, as a lecturer or somebody just going out into industry, suddenly thinking, oh my goodness, I'm going to make these mistakes about communication maths because I've not done it before. You can make those mistakes gradually when you're 5, when you're 10, when you're 15, and therefore you've actually learnt some of those skills along the way. So maths education, maths communication starts at a tiny age.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you for all our wonderful panellists. Thank you for all the questions from the floor. I think it's been a really good discussion. It's a shame that we ran out of time. And if you have any more comments on these 5 things that have been raised or anything else, fill in the feedback form and leave it on the desk. So thanks.